Tiberius, the man destined to rule the greatest empire in history, wasn't the choice Augustus had hoped for. Despite being a brilliant general and strategist, he faced rejection from the very emperor who shaped Rome. How could this happen? What was it about Tiberius that made Augustus hesitate, even knowing he had all the qualities needed to lead? While many believe his rise was inevitable, the truth is far more complex. Augustus's rejection not only shaped Tiberius's reign, but also profoundly influenced how he would govern Rome. Today, we'll explore the hidden reasons behind this rejection and how it sculpted the legacy of one of history's most enigmatic emperors. Augustus, the great architect of the Roman Empire, built his dynasty on politics, military strategy, and the ability to cultivate powerful alliances. When it came time to choose a successor, Tiberius, although extremely skilled, was not his initial choice. Augustus favored other options, like Gaius and Lucius, the sons of his beloved daughter Julia. The question arises, what was it about Tiberius that made him a less desirable choice? The complexity of the relationship between Augustus and Tiberius wasn't just based on politics, but on a series of personal and emotional factors that permeated the Roman court. Tiberius was an introspective man, reserved, almost cold. His personality stood in stark contrast to Augustus's public image, which was charismatic and easily relatable. This emotional distance created a silent distrust. Augustus believed that ruling Rome required more than military skills. It demanded a connection with the people and the senatorial elite. Tiberius, however, always kept himself apart from those games of influence, making him appear uninterested in forging strategic alliances or creating a loyal support network. He was a soldier, not a born politician. Another point of tension was the personal relationship between Tiberius and Augustus. Despite being a brilliant general, Tiberius was always seen as an isolated figure, suspicious even of his own family. Furthermore, Augustus was wary that Tiberius's reluctance to accept power reflected a lack of commitment to the future of the empire. This became evident when Tiberius requested to exile himself to Rhodes, voluntarily distancing himself from the responsibilities of Rome. To Augustus, this attitude seemed like a sign of weakness, or, at the very least, a lack of ambition, something unforgivable for someone destined to lead. Behind this dynamic was also the influence of Livia, Tiberius's mother and Augustus's wife. Livia, one of the shrewdest figures in Roman politics, did everything she could to ensure her son's rise. However, her interference generated silent resentments between Augustus and Tiberius. While Augustus acknowledged Tiberius's value as a military leader, Livia's constant manipulation created an invisible barrier. Tiberius was not just seen as a potential emperor, but as a pawn in his mother's game, something Augustus, with his vision of a stable and balanced empire, could not fully accept. Even though Augustus's rejection of Tiberius was clear, fate forced him to reconsider his options. The deaths of Gaius and Lucius left a void in the line of succession, and Tiberius, despite his perceived flaws, emerged as the only viable candidate. Augustus's reluctance to accept him reflected not only concerns about Tiberius's political capabilities, but also a fear that, once in power, he would govern with the same coldness and distance he had lived with until then. The rejection Tiberius faced throughout his life, especially from Augustus, left deep scars on his character. Unlike other successors who might view rejection as an obstacle to overcome, Tiberius internalized it in an almost corrosive way. His growing distrust, self-imposed isolation, and disinterest in building a solid power base were direct reflections of this emotional and political abandonment. He was a man who, even at the height of his power, seemed to govern under the weight of never having been desired on the throne. Tiberius's introspection and melancholy were not natural traits, but the results of a life lived in the shadow of unreachable expectations. Even as one of Rome's finest generals, he appeared unable to find satisfaction or purpose in military achievements. His decision to exile himself to Rhodes can be seen as an escape not only from Roman politics but from himself, an attempt to distance himself from a life in which he never truly felt at ease. Tiberius was, in many ways, the opposite of Augustus, whose ambition and desire for control shaped the fate of Rome. This rejection from Augustus also profoundly affected Tiberius's relationships with his contemporaries. His natural distrust was amplified by the feeling that, even in his position of power, he was constantly being watched, criticized, and judged. Instead of seeking allies, Tiberius preferred to keep a safe distance from everyone, trusting only a very narrow circle. However, this distancing created a vicious cycle. The more he withdrew, the more people became suspicious of him, which in turn heightened his paranoia and isolation. Tiberius also developed a deep cynicism toward power. He understood, better than most, that glory and public admiration were fleeting and often hollow. The fact that he was never Augustus's first choice led Tiberius to see power not as a blessing, but as a burden. Governing Rome was not a privilege to be savored, but a heavy responsibility he bore with resignation. Unlike other emperors who sought power for pleasure, Tiberius accepted it because there was no alternative. This set of traumas and rejections shaped Tiberius's governing style. He would become a distant leader, often absent, delegating power to his subordinates and retreating to the island of Capri in the later years of his reign. What many saw as negligence was, in fact, a way for him to protect himself from the political machinations of Rome, which he viewed as an endless pit of betrayals. Augustus's initial rejection not only shaped Tiberius as a person, but also set the dark and suspicious tone of his reign. Tiberius's rise to the throne was not a path paved by ambition or a desire for power, but rather by the inevitable circumstances that placed him in the line of succession. With the premature deaths of Gaius and Lucius, Augustus's favored heirs, Tiberius became the only possible choice. However, even as the remaining option, his entry into the circle of succession was marked by reluctance on both his part and Augustus's. For Tiberius, this ascension was not a personal achievement, but an imposition of fate. Upon returning from his self-imposed exile in Rhodes, Tiberius was reintegrated into the Roman political scene, but under conditions he did not choose. Augustus, aware that he needed a successor, adopted a careful transition plan, which included the formal adoption of Tiberius as his son, a strategic move that not only reinforced Tiberius's legitimacy, but also made him the rightful heir. However, this adoption did not erase the tensions that hung over their relationship. Tiberius, even when recognized as heir, continued to be treated with coldness and reserve. Tiberius's ascent was marked by a series of progressive responsibilities. He was tasked with military missions, such as pacifying the German provinces, where he demonstrated his brilliant military capabilities. However, these campaigns did not carry the same prestige as the triumphs of other generals who had governed before him. Tiberius was not a hero of the people, but rather an efficient soldier, whose skill lay in maintaining stability rather than expanding personal glory. This ascent was thus achieved not through acclamation, but by practical necessity. As time went on, Augustus gradually withdrew from administrative responsibilities, leaving the burden increasingly in Tiberius's hands. However, Tiberius seemed to treat power with a certain disdain, as if his leadership were a weight he was forced to bear. His reluctance was reflected in the way he governed. Tiberius was more of a cautious administrator than an inspiring leader. He knew he was on the throne because there was no one else capable, not because of an active choice or popular acclaim. When he finally assumed the title of emperor after Augustus's death, Tiberius entered power with a grim spirit. He was a leader thrust onto the throne by circumstance, not by desire. Unlike Augustus, who built the empire with his vision and ambition, Tiberius stepped in to maintain the structure intact. His forced ascent to the throne ultimately shaped a pragmatic and reserved governing style, where he sought to preserve the status quo rather than create significant transformations. Tiberius's leadership style was marked by a deliberate absence and a preference for governing from the shadows. Unlike his predecessor, who cultivated a strong and visible public image, Tiberius seemed to prefer distance, both physical and emotional, from the people and the Roman Senate. This style, often seen as negligence or disinterest, was in fact a carefully calculated strategy to avoid direct involvement in the power games and intrigues that dominated Roman politics. Tiberius was known for delegating much of the responsibility to his most trusted advisors, primarily Sejanus, the head of the Praetorian Guard. This decision was not just a matter of convenience, but also a way to preserve his own security and sanity amid the political machinations of Rome. Sejanus, ambitious and cunning, took advantage of Tiberius's trust to amass power, directly influencing many of the most important decisions of the government. However, this delegation of authority came at a cost. As Tiberius distanced himself from the center of power, Sejanus grew in influence, which would later result in betrayal. Another aspect of Tiberius's leadership style was his deep disdain for the Senate. He viewed the Senate as an institution filled with hypocrisy and deceit, a place where empty praises and subtle betrayals reigned. Tiberius never tried to disguise his contempt for the senators, creating a tense and distant relationship with the Roman political elite. His government became a mix of indirect manipulation and mutual distrust, where central leadership was obscured by layers of advisors and intermediaries who controlled the practical aspects of the empire. Moreover, Tiberius, over the years, withdrew physically from public life. He isolated himself on the island of Capri, where he spent his last years of reign, governing Rome from a distance. This generated rumors and speculation about his true mental and emotional state. For many, his reclusiveness was a sign of disinterest or even insanity, but for others, it reflected his pragmatic view that the empire could be maintained without his constant presence. By governing from the shadows, Tiberius demonstrated that real power didn't need to be visible to be exercised. Despite his physical and emotional distance, Tiberius still maintained control over the empire with an alarming precision. He closely monitored political events and acted in a calculated manner when necessary. His leadership, although criticized for its lack of visibility and charisma, proved effective in maintaining order and stability during a potentially tumultuous period. Tiberius's style was unique, a leader who governed not with an iron fist, but with a ghostly presence, always watching and controlling, but rarely revealing himself.